So we got our last caller for the night, which is Darren from Australia. I was hoping to get a chance to talk to him earlier because Darren is an author, and I actually pulled his book up. Darren, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, guys. How's it going?
Going well.
Doing all right. So you wrote a book about evidence for life after death. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I only wrote it last year while we were in lockdown. I had about 6 months with nothing to do, so I decided I'd write a book about the experiences that I'd had in the last 40 or 50 years of my life.
Okay.
We would like to hear about your most compelling experience, if you got one to share.
Look,
Can I ask you a quick question?
And I'll just give you a couple of quick ones. One of them was my little girl, my daughter Summer. She was 2.5 or 3 years old at the time, and she was playing happily on the floor in her bedroom, about 20 feet away from where I was sitting in the lounge room. And I heard her giggling and talking to herself. And then all of a sudden she got up, she ran out of her room, ran down the short hallway and started running around the sofa. And she kept turning back and looking behind her. And she said, "Stop it, stop tickling me." And she did this for quite a while. And I thought she was just playing a game. And she came up to me quite concerned. And she says, "Dad," she says, "will you tell Nanny to stop tickling me?" And I said, "What do you mean Nanny's tickling you?" And she said, "She's chasing me." And my mum had passed away about 1 year before that. And I thought she meant my mum, because we'd often talked about my mother who'd passed away. And I said, "What, my mum?" And she said, "No, Mummy's mum in the Philippines." And I thought this was really quite strange because she'd never mentioned her grandmother in the Philippines ever before. So anyway, I didn't think anything of it. And about half an hour later, I get a phone call from the Philippines from my brother-in-law to say that about 45 minutes ago, their mother had passed away in the Philippines. Now, something else that my daughter said was, "Nanny's chasing me because she's got legs now." But when I last saw my mother-in-law in the Philippines, she had both her legs amputated and was in a wheelchair due to diabetes. And at the airport, she said to me, "Darren, I really wish I had legs because I'd love to chase my grandkids around and tickle them." And that's just one story there, that the timing couldn't have been better. Could just be coincidence, but it was very, very uncanny.
Sure.
So,
Has your daughter?
Go ahead.
Quick question: had your daughter ever met Grandma from the Philippines?
Well, yes, but she was only about 9 or 10 months old at the time. She was just sort of starting to walk, and she hadn't. I'm sure she didn't remember her grandmother at all, and also she had never mentioned her at all for the 2.5 years we had been back in Australia after leaving the Philippines. She had never once mentioned her grandmother in the Philippines.
Was there pictures of Grandma around the house at all?
That was my next question.
No, there wasn't actually. No, there wasn't. I can't think of anything around the house that would reference her grandmother in the Philippines.
No FaceTime talks with the computer?
I mean, her grandmother... No, we didn't even have FaceTime or anything like that happening.
Okay.
My wife comes from a sort of like a remote village in the Philippines. It sort of didn't have internet access. Only like one person in the street had a telephone. So there was no sort of technology like that happening. And also, she wasn't sick at the time. She was, apart from having her legs amputated a few years before, there was nothing actually really wrong with her. No one expected her to pop off at any time.
Okay.
So for the fact that my daughter, to say that she was being chased by her right about the same time as she had just died 5,000 miles away, I just find it really strange.
Sure.
It is an interesting story. Definitely a little bit of mystery to it, considering that your daughter might not have known. Now, had your daughter ever heard you guys even talk about the amputations or anything along those lines?
Look,
I know that could be
possible,
pretty
but
traumatic.
I don't think so. Yeah, look, we'd had so much going on in our lives because I had my best friend pass away and my mum had passed away. To be honest, we didn't really talk a lot about the family in the Philippines because we had a lot going on with our family in Australia.
In Australia, sure.
So, yeah, we hardly ever mentioned the Philippines, to be honest. It sort of wasn't on our minds at that time, hadn't been for a long time. But what else happened after that was that my daughter, she was about 10 at the time. This was about 3 or 4 days after her grandmother in the Philippines had passed away. And she woke up and she saw a little girl, which she identified as being Filipina, standing in a white dress at the bottom of her bed. This would have been about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, it wasn't unusual for us because we have Filipino friends to have people come and visit. And my daughter looked at this little girl and said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I'm Lola." Now, my daughter told us at dinner that night, she said, "Who was that little girl in my room this morning?" And we said, "There wasn't any little girl in your room this morning." And she said, "Well, didn't we have some Filipino visitors come over?" And we said, "No." And she said, "Well, there was a little girl about 6 or 7 standing at the bottom of my bed in a white dress." And she told me her name was Lola. Now, my wife dropped her knife and fork and nearly knocked over her drink on the table, and she got all upset. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Well, Lola is the Filipino name for grandmother." So we honestly believe that Lola, Granny from the Philippines, had also come and visited my other daughter about 3 days after she passed away.
Did your daughters know her name? They I mean, surely they knew their grandma's name. I know when we were in.
Well, they always called her. Yeah, my family's originally from England. I moved to Australia when I was 3 years old with my family. Now, we usually call our grandparents Nana or Nanny or Grandma or Grandmother.
Sure. Yeah,
I've
standards.
never called anyone Lola, including my mother-in-law in the Philippines. We never called her Lola. Never used the word Lola around the house or anything like that. It's possible that my daughter could have picked that word up, but she swears that she saw this little girl, as plain as day, just standing, quite pretty, standing at the bottom of her bed. So what my wife did eventually was she got some pictures of her mother when she was about 7 or 8 years old, and she showed them to my daughter, Danielle. And Danny confirmed that little girl standing at the bottom of her bed was indeed her grandmother.
Okay. I guess what I was getting at was more that if your daughters knew your their grandmother's name, that they may have used her name instead of the Lola. But I get what you're saying now that it was presented as a child.
Yeah, we just don't sort of. Yeah, in my house we sort of. I mean, it's not my choice, but we always just speak English. My wife never taught any of us Filipino.
Okay. We were just talking a little earlier about some occurrences that can happen, and I remember being a kid and seeing some pretty weird shit too when I was a kid. But usually it came along with almost like a sleep state, you might say. Like, you've heard of sleep paralysis and stuff like that. We'd mentioned this a little earlier in the show. That can also cause hallucinatory type things, and if there's preconceived knowledge of some stuff, that might, come out in these sort of hallucinations. And kids have fantastic imaginations too.
And
sorry,
ahead.
Bree. My point is, do you think that it's possible that there is another explanation for the phenomena?
Darren, did we lose you?
Can't really hear you, Darren, so I don't know.
Darren?
I'm sorry. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The reason I wrote the book is because I've had about 30 or 40 such experiences. Both, myself, my wife, my kids, my parents, my brothers and sisters have all had something like that and contributed to the book. Some of it you could write off. A lot of it you could write off, but some of it is just, I believe, unexplainable.
Okay.
I would love to explore more deeply into this. Unfortunately, we're just out of time. We're definitely past it. But
another time, and
that'd be really cool to talk to you again, there.
Like when my sister called her husband an hour after she died. I'd really like to.
Oh yes, I want to hear about that.
They
That
just
sounds.
Be explained away. I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, and your book's on Amazon. Evidence for Life After Death.
It's on Amazon. It's available as an ebook and a paperback, and any proceeds I receive, I put back into advertising to sell more books because I just want people to hear these stories.
Yep. All right. Sure. Well, thank you, Darren. Appreciate your call, and definitely call back Darren. With some more of those cases.
Yeah, I hope I'm hosting or co-hosting.
I certainly will. Yeah. It'll
probably
be next week.
This will get Neil back over here too.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Darren.
All the best. Great show. Thank you.
Bye, Darren.
Bye.